So we're authentic, we're remarkable, we're surprising, we're entertaining. And the killers to content are often being too long, so do try, if you're making film, try to keep it sort of around 2.5 minutes or under. It can be longer, I mean, there is, for every rule you can break it. If the content's good enough, fill the time, but people's attention spans are short. Any sort of insincerity, if you're getting behind some sort of issue or some conversation, but there's a whiff of a lack of commitment from the brand, I would advise not to go anywhere near it. And make sure that you're showing stuff, you're showing what the brand is doing, you're not just hectoring and lecturing. So, in a nutshell, that's kind of how we look at it. We try to keep it sort of unscientific. You know, we use data where it's helpful, often in retrospect to show sort of how stuff is working and where it's going. But I think intuition is just as important. And research, just look for conversation and for sort of audience relevance. So that's sort of a brief glimpse of how an idea might come through and be judged in Rubber Republic. And now I'm going to let Tiff talk a little bit about how we sort of see the internet sharing content and what motivates people to share stuff.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. And I've just developed a cough in the last 5 minutes. I don't know if you've noticed, so apologies for that. So why share? Why do people share? What motivates them to share? This is an interesting thing because once we've already made our content, obviously we want it to strike a chord with some kind of corner of the internet. And so there's a lot of data on sharing, and we looked into it and we realized that these are things that we were doing kind of intuitively. But it is always kind of nice to have that confirmation back in the form of like numbers and studies and such like. So the first reason why people share is they just want to give something. I think we are by nature quite altruistic, especially on the internet. And giving something to people is a way that you can remain connected with them. And you want to appear to be helpful and good because everyone wants to look helpful and good. So my mum loves to share a lot of stuff with me that she thinks that are like, I've usually, will say thank you. But I think it's her way of staying in touch with me and wanting to appear useful, because mums want to be useful. But it doesn't just apply to mums, it applies to all of us. It's the kind of thing where if you have a friend with a particular interest or a particular interest in a celebrity or whatever, and they're part of a film, then you might want to share it because you want to give them the gift of content, which is always kind of not as good as a real present, but sometimes it's just as good. The more blatant one is to get something, and I think this is more to do with the way that brands use just social on the whole, Twitter and Facebook. Share to enter into a prize, or retweet to win or whatever. This one always feels a little bit sort of seedy. I don't know, it feels very like clearly opportunistic, because the person is only sharing just so they can directly get something, and it's usually kind of monetary or tangible. It's something that they can have, which isn't as fun as sharing something because you want to appear to be helpful. But it is still a motivator. I think it's quite a lazy one, but it is still one that's useful. The next one is status, and this is a really interesting one because I think we kind of thought that people would want to share for status a lot more than they do. But in a study by the New York Times, they basically discovered that the people who share because they want to be the first are actually in the minority. Because when you share something, say it's on your personal Facebook, and you're the very first, you're basically throwing it out there and going, I think this is funny and great. What does everyone else think? Whereas if everybody else thinks it's funny and great and then you share it, you feel like you're sort of nicely going along with the stream, sort of like the salmon. But status is really important in fan communities where there's a definite hierarchy, because then you want to be the first to share. Or if you are a tastemaker or an influencer, perhaps if you've got a blog or you're kind of influential on another platform, then to be the first to share there, it feels like it's kind of naturally part of the content that you're sharing anyway, is to be kind of, it's like sticking your neck out on the line, basically. But Tumblr is a really good example of people sharing for status. I don't know how many people use Tumblr, but it's quite a young audience and it's quite a competitive audience, especially if you have, like Doctor Who is a really interesting one, because there's a very engaged fan community and fan fiction community around Doctor Who on Tumblr. And they will kind of scramble to be the first to post. And it can, if you're willing to stick your neck out on the line, pay dividends. There was once an image set by this Brazilian artist that I'd seen posted. I think it was on Cosmopolitan maybe, and I put it onto Tumblr. And I was one of the first Tumblr feminists to share it on my personal Facebook and kind of endorse it. And I woke up and it had been reblogged like 100,000 times. And given that my Tumblr has probably got about 300 followers, this was quite significant. So I had the status for the day. But on the whole, I think a lot more of us are altruistic in our sharing, especially if we're over the age of maybe 15. But younger people do tend to share for status. The next one is really important, and it's probably the most important, and it probably will trump everything else. But everything that we do online is part of crafting our own identity. Everything we do on social is making and projecting an identity that we so desperately want to show to the world. And the content that we share is just a reflection of that. And this is especially potent, I think, in activism-based content. For people who know about Upworthy, when you share something from Upworthy, you're usually identifying with a cause. And that's a really powerful thing. And this is especially, I think, there's a fourth wave of feminism, which I would imagine that everybody has kind of seen or been caught up in. And a lot of the feminist content, I think, is shared due to identification and wanting to sort of let the world know that you identify as a feminist. I think, certainly for me personally, that's why I share that sort of content. But it does kind of give the world an impression of who you are. And everything we share gives the world an impression of who we are. So I think it's really important when we're making content to think, like, what will this say about the user when they share it? What does it say about them? Do they identify with it? And so that's really potent and really powerful. It's also can happen kind of, it can be twisted and manipulated in a quite a negative way. The Britain First Facebook page, which is a cause of some kind of controversy, is because people don't often know, they want to identify with their national identity and they want to feel patriotic and they want to share content that makes them feel patriotic. And a lot of people who share content from the Britain First Facebook page don't know that it's from a far-right kind of national, kind of almost hate group. But that sort of, the manipulation of our own identity and national identity can actually be used really, it can be used really, really well when you're making content, or it can be manipulated and used for evil. And then there's just emotional. It's just the initial reaction when you watch something, when you feel uplifted or... actually, it's mostly uplifted because, and I hate to keep quoting this study, but the New York Times did another study where they looked at 700 of their articles and they saw which ones were the most shared. And those that had a positive influence, a more kind of uplifting end to the story, were significantly more shared than the rest of them. So we were talking recently about sadvertising, and this new phenomenon of like leaving you watching a pre-roll ad where you're like crying, and John Lewis is probably a good example of that. But I don't think it is about being sad. I think a lot of stuff that we share that hits us in an emotional way is usually uplifting, and that's a really powerful thing. And it's also the most difficult thing to nail, I think, because this is people's emotions. This is like at the very core of them. And if you're talking about things that are going to kind of, like nostalgia is a really good one, but if you're kind of hitting at things and manipulating things to make people share, it's kind of quite transparent when you can see it's kind of sort of emotionally like pornographic almost, when they're just sort of pulling at strings to try and like make you feel. So this is a hard one to do and do it genuinely. But it can come from a really good place. Like the Honey Maid video that we showed earlier, I would argue comes from a really good place and is really emotional and is really uplifting. And if I was feeling a bit hormonal, I might shed a tear. So it's kind of, it's a good example of that. This is this is an interesting thing. I don't think this was supposed to be in here, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. This is one of my favorite things currently on the internet, and it's about Tumblr. So we were talking earlier about brands not shying away from things and uncomfortable things and just confronting them head on. And Denny's is a diner chain in the US. I don't know if many of you have had the pleasure of a Denny's Grand Slam breakfast. It's pretty good and also bad at the same time. It's a lot of bacon. But so Denny's have they've got a sort of family-friendly audience, and they've got a very front-facing sort of social profile. But they also have an audience of teenagers, stoners, people who like to go to Denny's at 4 o'clock in the morning and get pancakes, people who like kind of surreal things, people who kind of fetishize Denny's and pancakes. And they realized this, and so they made them a Tumblr all for that kind of audience. And it is absolutely fantastic. It's very weird. So there's basically somebody sat somewhere in Denny's whose job it is to make animated GIFs of people crying nacho cheese. And it does well. It does really well because it's specifically for that audience. It's what they want. They want surreal, slightly strange content. They know that their audience is on Tumblr because they're of a certain age. Tumblr in itself has a sense of humor and a language, much like other communities do. But I would say with Tumblr, that kind of sense of belonging to Tumblr is strong. And Denny's have absolutely nailed it. It's a very brave thing for a brand to do, I think, because on one hand, they're kind of trying to do this really nice, safe Denny's content that I've noticed of sort of videos of bacon and sausages meeting up and talking at Denny's, which isn't quite surreal enough. And then on the other hand, they've got stuff that absolutely nails it. This is not all cocks and balls in this presentation.
I have to apologise. There are two versions of this presentation. We decided to go for the second one, but I'm showing the first one. That's my fault.
So we're going to end with another one of our films. And this is a film that we made a couple of years ago that spoke directly to mums and did really well in the kind of mum community. And a lot of what we do is very candid, and we like to approach things and kind of pick apart the thing that perhaps somebody doesn't want to talk about. And a lot of parenting stuff seemed to be kind of whitewashing it. Excuse me. Seemed to be whitewashing kind of parenting and saying, oh God, it's hard at first, but it's kind of great. So we wanted to take a more honest approach. And so this is The Motherhood.
This is my crib, and these are my babes. My life and body have somewhat changed. I'm living it large, and by large I mean bigger. At least now I know the difference between a tractor and a digger. I express like the best from these holes in my chest. Wear my nursing bra like a bulletproof vest. Got my bitches at my side and my hose in the back. I spot my sexy handbag for a snot-stained sack. My decor was smart, my taste was extra picky. Now my surfaces are cluttered and nearly always sticky. Work versus home is a mental combination with my elbows deep in infant defecation. Wipe the sick off my coat, but the smell still lingers. Gave up on real food, eat leftover fish fingers. Once we talk about our lives, now the conversation switches. We compare cesarean scars with episiotomy stitches. It's the motherhood, it's another hood. I'd like to welcome you, but now you're here for good. We go from nappy rash to ending family feuds, and I'm flooding up your timeline with my baby news. Still got my wardrobe, but my thong now itches. Designer sofa, but now there's puke in the stitches. And I'm expressive, I express all the time, cause the doc said to not breastfeed is a crime. Trying to get my bod back with some yoga lattes. Hit up this Zumba class, swing by these new Pilates. I'm on an Atkins type, on a keto diet. I try avoid the bread, so I nearly never buy it. Pop a nappy on his butt without a change in mat. Sue BB's down my crew and I'm tight with Postman Pat. Sleep deprived and under house arrest. Think I'd sell both kidneys just to get some rest. Spent 3 months in PJs, it was clearly a sign. Joined a book club just so I could drink some wine. My sterilizer's so dope, oh my bottles be gleaming. I got a blender at the back so I can start up the weaning. It's the motherhood, it's another hood, and once you're in the club, you're in for good. Go from fighting nappy rush to endless doctor queues, and I'm flooding up your timeline with my baby news. Soft play, gangster. More G than your average mother. I'm a school run taker, fairy cake baker, deal maker, orgasm faker, knit raker, rattle shaker, cheese grater, nighttime waker. I'm a placator, peacemaker.
So I think we may have run out of time, so I'm not sure if we've got time for questions. Or maybe a couple. So does anyone have any questions?
That video, Tiff wrote that, but she wrote it by literally going through Mumsnet, it's fair to say. All those comments in there were stuff that we'd heard and played back. So if you look at the comments on this on YouTube, a lot of people are using lines in that to forward it to their friends. So the book club and the wine line, for example, is one that I've seen a lot of people share and quote that time or that line. Of all the videos we've made, if you look at the view to share ratio, this is by far the most shared video we've ever made. So it's it took us quite. I mean, a lot of these things aren't planned. They're beautiful surprises. I mean, they are. I mean, we wanted it to be successful and shared. But if you had asked me before we'd looked at the data which of our videos was the most shared, it really surprised me when it was this one. But it comes from. Hello. Okay, I'll just repeat that. So the question was whether budget plays a sort of a key factor in how good a video is. I'd say no, because our two most successful videos have been the ones with the least amount of money and the least amount of time. So it comes down to idea. I mean, that might be a bit disingenuous because to make a film does cost money. So there are certain things, if you want it to have a certain look to it, that you will need to pay for it. And most of our films are shot with, crews and, actors and locations. So you're looking at sort of paying for that. And I mean, we generally tell people to sort of around about 20 grand is what you need to start thinking about to make a film that has a sort of a polish to it. Having said that, you can look at YouTube and there are plenty of examples of videos that have been shot, very modestly that have done extremely well. I think when it's coming from a brand, there's probably an expectancy that, you should do it as well as you can and it should have a polish to it. But I think the content needs to fit the idea, and if the idea needs just to be gotten out quickly, Bodyform had to go quickly. There was a comment on the Facebook page, I don't know if you know the background, but this fella trolled their Facebook page, gently. It was funny, but it started to go viral. So Bodyform were like, we've got to respond to this. So we had no money, well, a little bit of money, no time, but a very obvious thing to sort of respond with. Sometimes more money brings more problems. There are more people involved, and it can slow the process down. I think when it works best, this kind of stuff feels quite effortless and there's a sort of, or frictionless, really. There's sort of, so I don't think money can help make something look better, definitely, but doesn't necessarily make it more shareable. Again, not at all. Actually, I mean, in that we don't want to alienate people. But I think you have to be pretty specific. You have to know the audience that you're going for. It's not to say that Fiat couldn't do a video that is aimed at sort of young single people. Yeah. So, but I think specifically this was the 500L. So it was a bigger version of the Cinquecento, and they were targeting sort of young families with it. And the sort of, I guess the sort of what we thought we brought that was authentic and surprising was, like as Tiff said, just talk about parenthood, how young parents talk about it. It's pretty bleak at times. It's it's very rewarding. It's lovely. But, I'm a parent. It's great. But there are things that advertising didn't really want to talk about. They wanted to sanitize it. We're like, social internet doesn't do that. Mumsnet certainly doesn't do that. Let's give something for them. So. Have we got anyone? Oh, someone. Okay. The question was: is there a product or a brand that you couldn't use video for? Prior to Bodyform, I'd have probably said feminine hygiene brands. In fact, someone I worked with said just that to me when we were at a conference and someone was talking about social video and how funny it was and how glib we can be, but I don't think so. I think that the brands that are really struggling are the ones that often have a very strong strong foundations in how old advertising used to work, and the ones that are really sort of arguably feminine hygiene is the hottest category in social video right now, with Always and help me out, Tiff. Hello Flow. It's sort of if there's a conversation a brand can get behind, or a product is relevant to, it's sort of open. It's open season. I think it's the ones that are scared to sort of let go and let sort of their audience participate in that conversation that are going to find it a struggle. I'm sorry, I'm answering.
Okay.
Just see that. Yeah. Okay.
I was going to say have you seen? Is it Cat that did the giant Jenga game?
Yeah.
Like arguably, that's probably
And
a really
Volvo
good
trucks.
example. Volvo trucks. It's still completely applicable, I guess. Sometimes the wider you cast your net and make something appealing, probably the better, rather than doing something slightly more dull and going with the crowd. So yeah, I think it's totally possible.
I think there's plenty of sort of interviews of the planning director at Fosdor and Bodenfors or whatever who did Volvo, and they were saying that their target audience are people who buy fleet trucks. That they're pretty specific, but they wanted the wives of these people, the friends of these people, everyone who surrounds these people socially, to go, wow, and I think if you start to sort of dehumanize people working business to business, they're as receptive to comedy and creativity as anyone else. I guess making it relevant is sort of the key. And there's something I saw. There's a conference called in the States that have been doing some stuff with Tripp and Tyler, who are YouTubers, and it's all about sort of how not to brainstorm, or how not to sort of or a conference call in real life, and they're very funny, but I mean they're only going to be funny, I guess, to people who understand that. But I think it's sort of, I think business to business does not need to be boring or sort of too sort of straight. You can play with it.
I think we've run out of time.
Should we go?
We're going to go.
Sorry about the slight balls up with the.